member and provider correspondence, or as we like to call it, our letters. This is an area that we all must focus some of our attention on to make sure we have the best practices in place. We must ensure timely updates to CMS changes, as well as make sure our desired changes get approved by them. We need to be mindful of our process to ensure that the right letter goes out to the right person at the right time. Thankfully, today we have someone who has many years of experience in this area. His name is Craig Gregorio. He has spent several years leading operations in both Medicare and Medicaid. He's also spent time assisting several health plans, including several five-star health plans, to analyze and improve how they manage their letters process. He also has had the opportunity to review several appeals and grievance systems available in the market today, some of which make life easier, others, not so much. So anyway, with all that said, we're happy to have Craig with us. And Craig, welcome aboard today.
Thanks, Dave. I'm happy to be here as well.
All right. Now this isn't the first time you've done a webinar with me, so I'll admit I haven't always been the softest with you on some of the questions I've dealt you. But let's start today by asking a relatively vanilla question. And I mean relatively vanilla. What do you feel CMS expects of health plans in terms of their letter process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gabe. I would call that more like Rocky Road, but we'll go with vanilla. There's a lot that they ask of us, and I would say this, that it's a good first question to ask in terms of what the regulations are. I would imagine that the audience on the call today is probably well versed in all the requirements around the letters. But I think you're correct to start there, because to develop a letter management best practice, it's important first to know what are all the regulatory requirements that we need to think about. So we obviously don't have time today to exhaustively go through all the requirements, but I did want to highlight a few just to get going on some of those requirements that we have to think about. I will say this though, the good news is that the ANG systems that I have seen in the market today, the best ones that are out there, have already thought about a lot of these requirements, and they've already built in those requirements, those regulatory requirements, into the management modules. So a lot of the heavy lifting is removed from the health plan. So I think that's a good thing where the industry is moving. So let me kind of highlight though for the audience and everyone, just some of the CMS guidelines that are out there. Again, this is in no way exhaustive, but one thing that we have to be mindful of is that all written communication must be written in a manner that is easily understandable to the enrollee. So it doesn't make sense for us to write the language in a PhD level when the member may not fully appreciate it. The plans need to also make sure that the language that they're using is approved by CMS. So we can't just willy-nilly send anything out the door. We want to make sure that those are approved letters. We also have to be mindful of written communications, that they must also provide for alternate formats and languages consistent with the Affordable Care Act and the Rehabilitation Act. And as a best practice, plans are encouraged to provide written notifications of favorable decisions, which should also include other applicable conditions or parameters. So again, in a favorable decision, you want to think about adding things like the duration of the approval. In other situations, if an enrollee has, let's say, a representative, all the notices that must be sent out to the enrollee per the regulations must be sent to the representative instead of the enrollee. When I've talked to CMS directly about this particular issue, and certainly in the regulations it says that you can also send out to the enrollee, but are not required to do so. But CMS is oftentimes, in discussions I've had with those folks, they've said that it's a best practice to send it out to both the representative and the enrollee. We also have to think about like the 14-day extension. When that occurs, the plan is supposed to promptly notify the enrollee in writing and explain the reason for the delay. On the grievance side, we have to make sure that grievances that are sent to us in writing also must be responded to in writing. And so, and then a caveat to that would be if a grievance came in, a quality of care grievance came in orally, we're still expected to respond in a written format. So again, that's a brief list of the requirements, certainly no way exhaustive, but it kind of gives us a flavor of some of the things that we need to think about when we're starting to construct the letter management best practices.
You're right. A lot of requirements, and that's just a summary of some of the things that they have to be aware of. And you're right. I don't think the folks have joined us today to just go over, what CMS is asking for on how, but better on how to handle or go about doing it. I bet you they've all had plenty of time reading all these regs right before they go to bed at night.
Very true.
Yeah. Therefore, Craig, if letter management best practices are needed, that must mean letters must have to change often or get updated a lot.
No, that's true, Gabe. The entire letter population tends not to be static. And there's a lot of reasons for this, and those on the phones this will all resonate with them. But, letters can be updated by health plans for improvement purposes. So sometimes plans will make letters more succinct, or in other cases, maybe they want to make the letters more member friendly. So they're going to change those letters accordingly. And then sometimes CMS will have a new guidance and request changes. So that's going to require some letter changes as well, or even to the templates. To the attachments. In other situations, letters may change due to findings from, let's say, a mock audit or CMS audit. And then at times, letters may be in a pending state, so they're not yet active in the system, but they're instead waiting for CMS to approve those letters. And then in addition, some changes may be as simple as only needing one update to one letter. In other situations I've seen, it could be much more complex where it may require large quantities of letters to undergo the same change. So I believe it's fair to say the folks on the webinar today have all experienced some of these situations, if not all of them.
All right. Well, with all that said, can you go ahead and tell us which areas health plans should focus on to improve the letter management process?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say this. I want to say that it's important to recognize that when you're a leader of a health plan, you're a leader of these areas, whether it's your people, your processes, your technology, these improvements don't all happen in one day. It may take time to do that. So when I talk about this first area, I'm really looking at the ideal state. So this area I would say is preeminent kind of over everything. So I'm a firm believer that in not having to rely on others to forge a new path forward. And what I mean by that is that for both the A&G system vendors and health plan IT departments, as important as they are to operations, it would be ideal if you require neither of those to help you make changes to letters or updates to the system processes. Because if you are relying on either one of those, then you're going to really be at the mercy of where you stand in line. And I've been in this, as Gabe mentioned, I've led health plans before for both Medicare and Medicaid, and sometimes I may not be first in line. So my changes may take a little longer than I was hoping for. And so therefore, I would say the first area I would focus in on as a leader is to progress towards that self-service ability, having an admin portal, having the ability to make the changes that you need to make without the need to call tech support from an A&G perspective or calling your IT department. So zero assistance from either the vendor IT is going to put you in, I think, a strong position. Again, this may take time to get there, and the details of what this means, Gabe, I'll unpack as we discuss, but that would be the overarching. Self-service is where you want to eventually get to when you think about letter management.
Well, I know it would have helped me in the past, but I definitely agree with the self-service. Can you tell us any other areas of focus that we should have?
Yeah, so self-service is obviously too high level, but I wanted to put that out there. The devil's in the details, as they say, so I like to kind of talk about a big area, and it's called letter configurations. There are several areas which need to be available to truly drive operational efficiency. And one of the questions out there real quick from one of the folks on the call was, will you be sharing the slides and or recording afterwards? So Gabe, are we going to be, or Tom, are we going to have that out there for folks?
Yes, so we'll be responding to all the questions and send the answers to everybody that has attended. In addition, our website will have the recording of this presentation as well.
Okay, cool. So yeah, let's talk about letter configurations. There are several areas within this that we want to think about to truly drive operational efficiency as well as compliance. So to start with, most of the A&G systems that I've seen in the market today, when you go live with that A&G system, they ask you for your letters, and they have the capability to upload those letters into their system. But what I've seen is the best-in-class letter modules that are out there in the market that really separate themselves from the lesser ones is not related to can you upload the letters. It's really related to the number of attributes and the specific attributes that you can apply to those uploaded letters. So I'll explain what that means as we go forward, but these associated attributes will make the letters unique and allow automation to take place. So I want to list some of those key attributes for everyone on the call. And again, these are going to be outlined in the PowerPoint, so you don't have to memorize everything I'm saying or even jot it down per se. You'll have that available to you in the PowerPoint. So the system should allow letters to have a unique identifier. And again, in most of those systems, I have seen that the capability, in most of those systems that I have seen. The unique identifier that I've seen is either one of two things. It's either a unique number or a unique letter name. Next, you should be able to identify which module the letter will be available in the system. So for example, you should be able to set it to only be available for Part C pre-service appeals. So therefore, let's say you had a Part D pre-service case, this letter should not be available for those particular cases. It's kind of, again, trying to eliminate human error. It happens, but what we don't want to do is have too many letters available to where the rep can initiate the wrong one. So this would be another attribute that helps drive compliance and ensure that the right letter goes out at the right time. Another attribute that I would highlight has to do with each letter having its own effective date and expiration date in the letter module. So if the current date is within those two dates, then the system flags it as an active letter. If it's outside those two dates, then the system flags it as an inactive letter. Some letters require a leader approval also before being allowed to be used. And so the letter module should have a flag that can be checked for leader approval required before it can be used in a particular case. We also have, and we'll get into this a little bit later, Gabe, but in some health plans, they have a quality review on the letter before they are sent. If your A&G system has that capability, then I would suggest that a flag to enable the quality review, and that's kind of like an operational audit, to be flagged so that when that letter is getting sent for approval, it can be reviewed by the appropriate team members to make sure it's passed, the test that it needs to pass. So an example of that may be like, maybe the language is too complex for the member, as an example. But we want to have that flag to enable a quality review if needed. Secondly, another area that's kind of aligned with this is letters. So the letters also need languages to be flagged in the system. So if you have a template that has Spanish, or if you have a template that has German or some other language, we want to be able to set that attribute for that letter so that when the system says, okay, this member needs a Spanish letter, it knows which letter to pull along with that English letter. Another area that will help calibrate and in terms of deciding what letters should be available in the system has to do with where those systems are generally, at what point in the workflow those letters are generally sent out. So we have three buckets for that. Usually they're in the acknowledgement letter bucket, or in the middle of the case, these are kind of called your investigation letters, or at the tail end of the case, these are more of your resolution letters. So if you can flag which bucket those letters should fall into, then again, we're continuing to calibrate and make more precise when the letter should be available in the system. There's another way to further segment those letters via what we call an availability condition in the letter module. And that will even provide even greater assurance that the right letter is going out at the right time. The only thing I would say there on that, Gabe, is that the availability condition really requires someone in the health plan to be able to write conditions accurately. Because if those conditions are written poorly, then that letter may not ever show up and be available. So I think that's an area that I would say proceed with caution. If you have the capability within your team to be able to do that, then great. Otherwise, I would probably leave the availability condition to the sideline for now. But I would say that if you think about all those different configuration attributes, those are going to help you send the letter out, the right letter out to the right member at the right time.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of good and a lot of things to keep in mind as you're setting up your systems or setting up your process flows. Go ahead. Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I would like to talk about two other attributes that I think are very important. One is going to have to do with user tags, and the other is system tags. So these are tags that are, these are attributes that are both going to be required to generate a good letter. And you know what's funny is my power just went out. 1 second. Give me 1 second, Gabe. I apologize.
No worries, sir. It's those winds here in Southern California.
No, it may be. This is like live TV. It's coming back up. Sorry about that. There it is. Yeah, that was kind of funny. I'm like, oh, nice timing. Okay, sorry about that.
Murphy doesn't care.
Yeah, not at all. So what I was saying is that those two attributes, I'm saving the best for last because I think these are important to share. So system tags are those fields in the workflow which already have populated values. So I oftentimes think of like the member's name or the member's address. Those values are already in the workflow. Those fields in the workflow should be mapped to the same fields in the letter, so the values get pulled right into the letter when the letter is initiated. And I have seen a lot of systems out there that do have that capability. The other type of tag, though, is called that user tag. And these fields in the letters have variable language. It is usually typed by someone or can change or be edited. So it's ideal if the attribute can also be done in the letter module. I have seen a couple systems out there that you actually have to download the letter to your desktop, manipulate the Word document or whatever it is in that variable language, and then upload it back in the system. I would say that's not ideal. I would say that you want your letter management module to all be within the workflow itself. So let me give you an example of what this means. So, in a grievance, you usually have a resolution field that highlights what the resolution to that grievance is. And what's in there usually gets pulled into your universes, and the content in that resolution field will make sense for that field. But if we flag that as a user tag, and that gets pulled into a letter, maybe some type of grievance letter, the language that's in there isn't going to be perfectly flow with the letter itself. So it's going to need to be edited, and a user's going to need to edit that. But the idea is that the general solution to that particular case is in that field, and then it's a matter of the rep editing that to make sure it flows with the letter. So I would conclude that the inclusion of those two attributes into the letter configuration will round out kind of the best practices as it relates to configuring those letters.
Okay. So Craig, just to clarify for myself, so you're pretty much saying that the user tag is the how to adjust the letter to fit the right audience, right? So if you're writing the provider, it's refreshing that, in regards to your patient. If you're writing the patient, it's in regards to your claim, correct? Something like that nature?
Yeah, it's going to be tailored to that particular case. And so it's going to require some thought process by the representative, and it's going to be edited. So,
Okay.
using the resolution field as a starting point, but it's definitely going to need to be massaged to make sure it fits to the flow of the letter.
Okay, so it makes sense when they write it. Gotcha.
Exactly.
There's a lot there in terms of all letter attributes, which should be in a letter module to drive greater operational efficiencies as well, boy. That's a lot to remember.
No, exactly. And why this is so important is because, kind of as we mentioned at the very outset, there are times when a bulk of letters all need to be updated. And instead of doing one at a time with these attributes, what they'll allow you to do is make a mass update to those letters with one update. And that's going to save the team an incredible amount of time. So that's why some of this is very important.
In addition, if you set your letters up properly, you could probably have fewer letters because it takes into account what the system's doing and saying to appropriately adjust that letter versus having, 3 that say the exact same thing just with different verbiage. All right.
Yeah, I have seen plans with integrated templates that provide, which will allow fewer, or the need for, it gives them an opportunity to have lesser number of letters because they have integrated templates. So, yeah.
All right. Sorry to derail there for a little bit, but what other areas would you like to bring up to strengthen the best practices?
Yeah, sure. In addition to having kind of that self-service overarching goal, and then having that strong configurability within the letter management module, I think it's really, really critical to have a flexible attachment functionality. And so what I mean by that is, attachments need to be linked in the system to the letters that are applicable. So this linking process, is really, really important. And the linking ability ensures that the system pulls the correct attachments 100% of the time for each unique letter. So attachments should also have attributes, just like the letters, they should have attributes. And some of those attributes, while they're not as many attributes, some of them are the same. So for example, the attachment name, that should be unique. If it's an attachment number or attachment name, we should have a unique identifier for that attachment. And there should also be an effective date and expiration date, very similar to the letters. We need to have that also on our attachments. I guess a unique attribute for attachments would be the order number. The order number allows the system to know which order the attachment should be attached to the letter. So that, if you have, let's say, 3 or 4 attachments, and this is attachment order number 3, then it's going to stand third in line. And this provides a standardized way to ensure your attachments are going out in the right order. In other cases, it may be that some attachments are not needed for every letter. So this will also allow you to flag certain attachments for certain letters and other attachments maybe not have them associated to those particular letters. Attachments is also another area that can change via CMS if they decide a change is needed. And the ability to activate a new attachment and set its order will allow all the letters that have that attachment to be updated simultaneously. So I would say flexibility in that attachment area of the letter module is going to be a requirement because we all know that attachments aren't always going to be static.
Okay. Well, that's great news. And I know from personal experience from health plans I've been part of in my career, we've had issues where the attachments were either missing or inappropriately attached or just the wrong order. So this should help both on both those situations to making sure that it's there. What else would you like to bring up to the group?
Yeah, and by the way, Gabe, that happened to me as well. So oftentimes we were missing attachments. And the thing is, one thing I realized a long time ago was that I don't want to have to scramble to get ready for a CMS audit. I want to be ready in real time. So every case that gets completed, ideally, and again, there are large plans with large volume of cases, so I want to respect the reality in some situations. But ideally, you want to have that ready to go on each case. So to that end, I'm a big believer in compliance. I believe that the best A&G systems has compliance woven all throughout the application. But I also believe that it takes a team to be successful. I believe it is a best practice to do a quality review on letters before they go out the door. And again, as I mentioned, some health plans have very large volumes, so that's going to be a challenge for them, and it may even be impractical at times. So they may have to do spot audits, as an example. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that up front. However, if that's not the case for you, then I would encourage implementing a quality review process. And the ideal letter module would have already thought about that and have included within it the ability to publish and approve letters. So a letter can be completed by a team member, let's say, and then once done, sent over to the quality review team for final approval. And I've liked the systems that I've seen that if they have this capability, when the quality review team identifies issues with the letter, let's say, a couple examples that I've seen, maybe it doesn't, again, directly address the member's issue, or maybe the language is too complex for the member to understand it, then the system should give two options to the health plan. Number one, allow the quality review team to make the appropriate updates to basically, refresh that letter and make it accurate. Or push the letter back and allow the representative to make the necessary changes based on their feedback before that letter gets approved. So either option should be available, because some health plans want to ensure that the quality review team was the last team that touches it. Other health plans I've seen, no, I want to teach them a lesson. I want them to make the changes so next time, they won't make that same mistake again. So I've seen it in both cases. The other area that I think is important to talk about is the publish and approve process. In that area, there's the alternate formats that we need to think about. There's the translations to other languages that we need to think about. So let's say the member is requiring a large font letter. So in their member profile, it's flagged as alternate in the alternate field that they want large font letters. Once the letter is approved in the system, it should allow the rep to be able to update this letter in large font before it's sent out. So typically what I've seen is that all the letters have margins. They have a top margin, a bottom margin, a margin on the left, a margin on the right. Those are fixed. However, if the font changes from, let's say, 12 to 16 or 18, then the system will recognize that it's a larger font and then keep those margins intact and then just push the letter down, because now, obviously, because larger font, it's going to require more space going down. So I've seen it auto format based on the triggering of that large font flag. So again, I think systems ideally should have that ability. The other area that I think they should have is recognizing that translations are sometimes needed. So not every letter is in English or Spanish. Sometimes it's in other languages. So I think it's important for the health plan to evaluate how many letters go out in these other languages. If it's a high enough frequency, I think it's a best practice to have that template already completed and translated into that other template, and then just load it in the system, flag the attribute that this is, let's just say, a German letter, so you have it ready to go. But then when that case comes in and the member says, I need language German, then the variable language, that user tag that we talked about earlier, that would be sent out via a task from the system to the translation vendor for them to translate the German variable language. Once they translate it, that task gets sent back into the system, and that language then gets populated into the German letter in that user tag field. And then that German letter now has been approved along with the English letter, and will obviously be sent out to the member, representative, or provider, whoever it's going to, along with the associated attachments. And by the way, I would mention that it is the least expensive way to do it. So you're only sending out the variable language to the translation vendor, unless, again, it's so infrequent that you might want to just send the whole template out. But if it's frequent enough, I would just say you probably want to just send the translated, variable language out, so that you're not charged more for that. But the alternate formats ultimately, yeah, it is. And ultimately, those alternate formats, in my opinion, should be woven into the letter module workflows and be seamless to the reps.
All right. No, absolutely. It's a cost savings with anything else. All right. So we've talked a lot about the systems and what the systems should be providing and all that, Craig. Honestly, have you actually seen any A&G systems that does everything you've talked about?
Well, yes. I mean, the answer is yes. But I will say the numbers are shrinking considerably. So some systems I've seen have a few of these things. Some systems have really thought through this extensively and have included all that I've shared. But yeah, the numbers are shrinking, Gabe, to be truthful. There are a couple out there. The reality is, though, I have to say this, that I think vendors need to be more and more mindful of efficiency gains that they can pass on to the health plan, as well as compliance around these letters. Letters is a very big piece of what we do at health plans. It's kind of the culmination of all the efforts that transpired prior to those letters. So So getting the letters right is really important. And so I think it's incumbent on the A&G vendors to make sure they've been thoughtful and the ingenuity has been built in to the system and ultimately that letter management process.
All right. Well, thanks for that insight, Craig. We're at just about the 36-minute mark. Do you have anything else you want to add to the group before we go into questions?
Yeah, just one last thing, Gabe, if I may, and I know we're kind of running out of time. Let me just say that we want to talk a little bit about that last leg of the letter process. And it's usually called by a lot of health plans the letter fulfillment process. So you can have a system that does all things that we talked about, but if you have a broken back-end process, then you're really not going to have, well, you're not only going to have compliance issues, but you may have member dissatisfaction issues as well. So I think it's really important to kind of briefly talk about that. So I think we should start with when written notification is considered delivered per CMS. It's considered delivered on the date and time, if applicable. The plan or delegated entity has deposited the notice in the courier drop box or external outgoing mail receptacle. So that's an example would be like a U.S. Postal Service or a FedEx bin. Or in the cases of electronic payments, the date the plan distributes the funds for payment. So if you work with a print vendor and you send your letters to them for fulfillment, then ideally you would want to integrate your A&G system with them. This would allow for the letters, once approved, to be automatically pushed to your print vendor, who will print and mail them. The print vendor then needs to return back to you via the integration, the date and time the letter was deposited in the courier drop box or the external outgoing mail receptacle. So you need that back and forth communication with that integration. This will allow that information to be stored in your A&G system for audit purposes. And if you do not have a print vendor, the same system or the same process should apply for in-house if the letters are printed and put in the mail stream. But all the letters should be attached to the case they represent. So when audited, the cases are selected, and let's say the cases are selected by CMS. For each of those cases, the approved and published letter is going to be attached along with the date and time the letter was deposited in the mail. So if you have this process in place as well, I think you have a very sound, in my opinion, a very sound letter management practice in place. And I think, Gabe, I hit on most of the areas that I wanted to touch on today.
Well, you definitely hit on a lot of areas, Craig. I've been here trying to write some of this down as a summary. You talked about configuration attributes we should think about to drive greater operational efficiencies and compliance. And again, always focusing on compliance, right? You also discussed having attachment flexibility, such as having order number attributes. I hope I said that right. Yeah, number attributes to establish a standard process for your attachments and to ensure that they're in the right order and the right ones to the right subject. We discussed the publish and approval workflows to ensure letters are quality reviewed, hopefully before sending it out, or at least a process in place that reviews the letters to ensure that the reps are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then you discussed the letter fulfillment process. I know a lot of us have always relied on either print vendors or our internal fulfillment groups. But the importance of the integration with the print vendor to receive back the information, because you're right, the postmark's what's key. The importance of receiving back the date and time the letter was actually dropped off in the mail receptacle or picked up. So yeah, that's quite a bit. So we are at the 40-minute mark. So why don't we go ahead and open it up to any questions that are out there at the moment?
Sounds good.
Okay. I have one that came across. It says, can you explain or clarify what you mean about availability conditions in the letters? So I guess I'm going to try to interpret that. I guess back when you were talking about the letters, I think it's screen 5 or so, you talk about the availability conditions. What do you mean about that? A little more detail.
So I do understand the question. So an availability condition is kind of that advanced way to set a condition against the letter. So it may say something like, only allow this, when the final case determination is partially denied, as an example. only allow this letter to be available at that time. So if it's a fully denied or approved case, you would not show that particular letter. So the condition allows you to, based on the fields in the workflow, conditionalize if that letter is going to be available for initiation by the rep. So I've seen this. I think it's a double-edged sword. Again, if folks on the team are able to write conditions based on the fields in the workflow and identify, so if a particular field in the workflow has a certain value, then allow the letter to be available. So that's what I meant by that availability condition. But the key there is, if you're not very good at writing conditions, then you may write a poor condition, which would actually eliminate that letter from being available, and that would be even worse than having it openly available for almost any case. So the availability condition would probably be available, I would say, if you have a unit that they're really good at writing reports and they're really good at writing conditions, then maybe that's something that you would have available in your letter management module. But again, it's a condition that's based on fields in the system and values related to those fields. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. So in essence, don't send out a resolution letter when you're acknowledging receipt.
Exactly.
All right. Hey, another question that was received is, what is a typical volume of letters most plans have or should have?
Great question, Gabe. So I've seen, again, I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of plans. I also worked at a plan myself, and I've seen the range. The range is, I've seen on the low end around 40 letters for a health plan. Those are typically the smaller health plans. And then some of those larger health plans I've seen all the way up to almost 200 letters. So I think it really depends on the health plan size and possibly even the maturity of some of their letter management processes. But I've seen it go from 40 to 200. So I don't think there's really a best practice, in my opinion, on the number of letters a health plan should have. I think it's really going to be contingent on kind of the thought process that health plan has in terms of what they need to get out to members, providers, and representatives. So 40 to 200 is what I've seen.
Okay. Awesome. Let me take a quick look. All right, I'm not showing anything over there, so.
That means it was thorough, Gabe.
That's right. That means you were thorough.
I'm just joking. I'm joking.
No, that's all right. You did good. You did great, Craig, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today on that. All right. With all that said, and again, with how quiet it's gotten, I want to thank the audience for joining us today. Thanks again to Innover for sponsoring, and thanks again, you, especially Craig, for taking the time to do this presentation with me today.
No problem.
I know my questions to you are usually not too soft, so we'll go from there.
Thanks, Dave.
Nah, we will leave the meeting on just in case somebody comes up with a question that they want to ask us. Or again, you can always send your questions to info@innover.com. But again, we will leave the presentation going on for a little bit at this point in time. So if you do want to send it in, just please send in your questions. We will be responding to all the questions we've received and any that we do receive via email to the group. And again, in the next day or so, the presentation will be available online at innover.com on our website. So please feel free to go there and see this webinar or any of the others that we've conducted in the recent past. Other than that, I wish everybody a great and a healthy day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Gabe.